and welcome to the 757th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, here on WOON 1240 AM and 99.3 FM, and our 11th year on the air. I'm Paul, and today we're broadcasting live from the historic Exeter Town Hall in Exeter, New Hampshire. And it's the 2018 Exeter UFO Festival and the 53rd anniversary of the 1965 incident at Exeter. Okay, and before we introduce our distinguished panel, let's acknowledge the organizers of the Exeter UFO Festival, which raises funds for children's charities here in southeastern New Hampshire, the Exeter Area Kiwanis Club, and the invaluable assistance of Seacoast Saucers of New England and Granite Sky Services. Okay. I'm going to pass the mic down and very quickly ask the speakers to introduce themselves, and we will continue from there. I will tell you, we didn't get to this before, but there's a mic here for anyone from the audience who would like to ask a question, and we'll introduce the speakers, and then you're very welcome to come up and begin questions. We also have questions from listeners from all over the world, which we will state if no one is at the mic. So why don't we begin with Jennifer Stein?
Hello, I am Jennifer Stein. I just recently presented on Göbekli Tepe, an ancient site in Turkey, and I'm very, very pleased to be here. I'll pass the mic.
Hi, I'm Mike Stevens of Granite Sky, and I presented earlier on People Not Proof.
Hi, I'm Bob Terrio, and I presented on Walt Disney and their connection with aliens and UFOs.
Hello, and I'm Shane Sirois, regular guest co-host on this show, Behind the Paranormal, and I'll be presenting on parasitic life forms later on today.
My name is Marc D'Antonio. I'm the Chief Photo and Video Analyst for the Mutual UFO Network, and I did a presentation yesterday on exoplanets and the possibility of alien life.
Good afternoon. I'm Peter Robbins. I'm an investigative writer, and the talk I'll be giving after our broadcast will be on the deaths of key writers, journalists, and authors, and whether or not there was any foul play involved.
Hello, I'm Kathleen Marden, and I am MUFON's Director of Experiencer Research and on the Board of Directors and a research consultant to the Edgar Mitchell Foundation for research into extraterrestrial encounters. I am also the niece of Betty and Barney Hill, whose abduction in 1961 was made public in 1965, and my presentation yesterday was on my investigation of their case and research on their archival records.
Good afternoon. I am Chuck Creteau. I'm one of the co-founders of Seacoast Saucers. I'm also the founder of the Galileo Interviews, and we gave a speech yesterday on commonalities, synchronicities, and modern-day contact, what we can learn from experiencers today. And it's a pleasure to be here today.
Hello, I'm Valerie Lofaso. I'm an empathic medium, an experiencer, an author, and a co-founder of Seacoast Saucers of New England, along with Chuck.
Okay, thank you all. Let's begin with our questions. If anyone has a question from the audience, please walk up to the mic there. It's right on the right. But in the meantime, let's take one. This is to Kathy Marden. This is from Tasha from Wichita Falls, Texas. And Tasha asks, why do you feel that the Betty and Barney Hill case got such publicity? And did Betty and Barney Hill ever experience any more contacts? Well, you've seen that already. All right. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Well, I think that there are many reasons why the Hill case got a lot of publicity. First of all, Betty and Barney did not come forward initially. They had a scientific investigation of their events. Many of the scientists who did the investigation believed it was real. Betty and Barney were credible people. She was a social worker for the state of New Hampshire. He worked for the post office, but he was also very active in the state of New Hampshire in the civil rights movement and through the Rockingham County Community Action Program that he and Betty helped to set up on a committee. And he received an award from Sergeant Shriver for the good work he did. He was also appointed to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission's State Advisory Committee. So they were upstanding people in the community, credible people who underwent a scientific investigation, did not want to go public with their events. It was brought to the public as the result of a violation of confidentiality. Then they agreed to allow John G. Fuller, who was a very well-known author and investigator, to write their book. I think that's another reason. Dr. Benjamin Simon, the doctor who did their hypnosis separately over a period of 6 months and imposed amnesia at the end of each session so that they could not compare notes. And also because some of their sessions were so traumatic that he did not want them to be further traumatized by these memories. So there is a lot that makes their case very credible, including physical evidence that was scientifically investigated. It was the first known case in the United States as well. And the first brought forth publicly around the world. It was a bestseller around the world, and the movie in 1975, The UFO Incident, starring James Earl Jones and Estelle Parsons, appeared on network television. It was the movie of the week. So I think there are many reasons why this case receives so much publicity. In answer to your question about whether or not they had further encounters, they certainly did have sightings after that. And Betty took part in an experiment with a team of scientists to try to call in UFOs. And she was somewhat successful in doing that after a period of about 4 months of trying this nightly. And so they did have that kind of contact that was documented. Betty, I do believe, also had other encounters. You might want to call them abductions. She did not remember a lot about it. She did not want to admit to it because of the criticism that was heaped upon her. And when other experiencers were coming forward with their stories, or they were being revealed to the public just by the fact, such as in Travis Walton case, where he was missing for 5 days. So that was brought forth to the media. Criticism was heaped upon those people. There were attempts made to discredit them and to destroy their lives, to destroy their careers by certain disinformants. And so that was another reason not to come forward with the information about further contact.
Thank you, Kathy. We have a question from an audience member. And just step up to the mic and
Yes.
close to the mic, please.
Yesterday morning, in the first session of the day, Valerie Lofaso and Chuck Creteau, among the concepts that they shared, made a reference to how fear holds us back from opening up. And today, for me, as I listened to Mike Stevens speak in the first segment, and I heard the comments that Peter Robbins made afterwards, I was thinking more about how the entire subject that we're here to address opens things up to accepting our oneness, and thinking about how fear seems to be one of the principal things keeping human beings from opening up to looking at oneness in a new way. I would invite any of the speakers I named, maybe Valerie and Mike, Chuck and Peter, to whoever prefers to. How does what do you feel about how facing fear maybe makes us stronger, opens us up more to more possibilities in welcoming oneness?
Okay, we'll start with Valerie Lofaso.
Sure. Fear, that's, a very touchy subject for me personally. I hate fear, but I'm filled with it at all times. I've had my own issues. I mentioned an experience with my father. It's very personal. My father's not with me anymore. He's so dear to my heart that it makes it even more difficult to talk about, to have that possibility of somebody ridiculing it. And I did try to overcome my fear and put myself forward one time recently, and I actually had my story shot down before I could even say what it was. I had somebody just completely disregard it, and it was very hurtful to me. So it's really hard when things like that happen to want to then go back and do it again and take that chance, when things like that happen. So anytime anybody does share their story, I just give them a huge applause for getting through that fear that I can't seem to overcome at this point in my life.
And Charles Creteau?
Yeah, so yesterday we shared a few stories, and one in particular story had to do with a young lady who had started to have this contact. She was becoming more spiritual, and then all of a sudden she's in this place where she's had all these experiences, and she pulls over the car and hears this woman scream. She gets out of the car, but she doesn't become reactive. And by reactive, I mean immediately reacting to the circumstance at hand. She doesn't become fearful, thinking someone's going to attack her or somebody's being killed. Instead, she lets go of the fear and she looks around, and there's absolutely no one there and no reason why anybody screamed. There was no reason why she should have heard that. And she later said that she received a message that was their way, meaning the visitors, whether you want to call them aliens, the others, whatever, ETs, of testing her, and that led to her having so many more experiences over time. But she's not the only person to talk about how fear impacted that. We talked a little bit yesterday about how it is everybody wants to have an experience, but nobody wants to have to deal with the fear associated with that. How many times have we said we wanted to do something? A lot of people say they want a sky jump, but it isn't until they get in the top of the plane ready to jump out that they're confronted with the feelings that are involved with jumping out of a plane. I've heard of countless stories, and I would ask anybody else on the panel to talk a little bit about stories that might be reminiscent of fear and how they got in the way of experiences. But one thing that we saw as a commonality with a lot of people that claim to be experiencers is fear is an obstacle that can get in the way of having that true experience. So I would challenge anybody here to think of a time in your life in which you wanted to do something so bad and you had to overcome that fear, and what came out of shedding that fear, the great examples that come out of anything in life. And sometimes I think that, I just know the stories that people have shared with us are about shedding the fear, because it clouds our judgment, it clouds how we see life, and it impacts all of the beauty that we can have. So that would be my answer to your question.
It's a wonderful question, an important one. All fear, if we take it down to the baseline, is fear of the unknown. Am I going to get sick and get cancer? Are my kids going to turn out okay? Or is the country going to go to war? Am I going to fall in love? Is there going to be money left in Social Security system by the time I need it? If there's one fear that could be boiled down to being more emblematic of fear of the unknown, it probably as good as any is the classic alien abduction experience. Nothing in our Western culture, our Judeo-Christian traditions, prepares us for this. A natural, healthy reaction is certainly, I'm scared, I don't know what's happening. A lot of it has to do with attitude, and is the glass half full, is the glass half empty? At the same time, talk is cheap, and it's easy for somebody to talk platitudes about it. One of the most invaluable things about a good support group, working with an investigator who really is a humanist and tuned into your needs and not just seeing you as another case or a bug on the wall that they're getting information for their next talk or book, or a therapist or a loving family or a good relationship with somebody you can simply talk about and will accept these things. You can get to the point where you still have fear, but it doesn't have you. For me, a great model was my late sister Helen, who brought me into this work. To say overnight would be an understatement. Within a matter of minutes, sharing with me childhood memories of being taken, sharing those memories more than 40 years ago. my life changed instantaneously in a way. And years after that, when Bud Hopkins started to run what arguably is the first UFO abduction support group, she was a member, and valued it very much. I got to attend meetings because I was Bud's assistant, and what I observed over a relatively lively and not terribly long period of time was Helen and other people getting to the point of, I can hardly believe this, but this thing that I think about every day, that has been running my life to a degree, I now see it's a real thing. It happens. It happens to other people. It happens to me. And guess what? I accept that. It might even happen again to me in my life, but that doesn't mean I'm going to not pursue my dreams or not fall in love or not have fun and not even, have fun at their expense. The hell with them, whether they're good or bad. It shook me up, and I'm going on with my life, and I'll be there to support other people.
Okay. Thank you, Peter Robbins. I know that Shane Sirois had a comment.
Yeah, so what I wanted to say about fear is, well, first of all, one of my specialties is dealing with parasitic life forms that attach themselves to people or attack people. And what I've been able to deduce after over 30 years is their ultimate goal is to get you to the state of fear. And the reason for that, I believe, is to hurt individual spiritual growth, and as well as all of us as a whole. That is their goal, to get us to the point of fear and to hold us down from growth. And Mike Stevens?
Fear's a funny thing, and it really depends on how we want to look at it. What most of us consider and call fear is more of a worry. There's actually, in my opinion, something instinctual fear, something that we react to a situation because we're instinctually sense we're in danger. And I think a lot of that comes into play as well, but I just want to make that differential.
Thank you, Mike Stevens. Jennifer Stein.
I have a little acronym I use for myself in self-coaching that I'll just share with the listening audience and you here. It's FEAR. It's false evidence appearing real. When I am struck by fear, I acknowledge it, pay attention to it, because it might be self-preservation, but in many cases it's not. It's my perception of my reality that's stopping me in my tracks. So once I've evaluated my safety and my emotional safety, then I try to coach myself forward saying, this really might be just false evidence appearing real. I think we all have to be our own coaches in life because few of us have them. And fear can be very paralyzing. It doesn't need to be.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. We have a questioner from the audience. And please, right up to the mic.
My question is for Valerie, and my question is, as an empathic medium and an experiencer, how do you distinguish between spirit contact and possible ET contact?
Valerie Lofaso.
That's a great question. In my experience so far, so as an empath, I tend to feel the core of any being, whether it's human, animal, living, dead, whatever. When ETs show up to me in a spiritual way, their energetic core feels very, very different than humans. Not negative, not positive, it's just very different. I don't know if it's intention or if it's just a product of what they are, but there's an easily distinguishable difference for me personally. I don't know if it's like that for all intuitives who also communicate with ETs, but that's what I experience.
Thank you, Valerie. If there are no more questions from the audience at the moment, we'll move on to one from Brian from McKeesport, Pennsylvania. And Brian has a question for Bob Terrio and Marc D'Antonio or anyone else on the panel. As a lifelong fan of science fiction movies and realizing that only so much accuracy is possible in such a little-known field as astrobiology, study of life on other planets, theoretically, I really appreciate it when filmmakers try to get the science right, as in Interstellar. Do you think that producers, writers, and directors are taking more pains to be accurate in the most recent science fiction and alien films and going forward? We'll start with Bob Terrio.
Well, sci-fi was always kind of a B-movie treatment for many, many years until 1968, when Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey set a new standard and a new high bar for realism and science fiction films. And basically was, even though it was very realistic, the core story is science fiction. Humans in first contact and later contact with entities or beings from another planet, another galaxy, another world. And I think since then, there's been people who generally aspire to try to, at least in a visual way, make things look as real as possible. And to, I think Stanley Kubrick really did set a standard for, okay, this is what we have to try to achieve, this level of realism, and anything below that, you're going to kind of fall flat in your face. So I think it set a new expectation so that George Lucas with Star Wars and Close Encounters and other films of that nature aspire to reach that level of realism in both the effects. And like with Interstellar, they're also trying to incorporate concepts that are up to date with the latest scientific concepts in quantum physics and other aspects of real science. I'll let Marc answer.
Thank you, Bob. As far as the science fiction being realistic based on real science, the truth is, I have seen that there are some sci-fi shows that cast it all to the winds and say, hey, whatever brings in people into the theater, because the theaters are dying. So they go for glitz and glamour, and the realism and the scientific accuracy, most importantly, many times gets left at the door. However, as some of you know, I work with a master visual effects pioneer, Douglas Trumbull. Some of you are here at the UFO conferences probably because of his work. He worked on 2001: A Space Odyssey, as Bob just talked about. He was the guy who did the special effects. That was his first job. And then on Close Encounters, he did all the special effects. So the fact that these UFOs had these lights on them, okay, this is a scientific basis from which he drew to produce effects that would be as realistic as could possibly be expected in such a situation. Obviously, he didn't say, let's go look at the role of UFOs that have landed here before and try and mimic that and make it look real. That's not what he did. Obviously, that was an artistic decision. Spielberg allowed him to run with that, and that's why the Close Encounters movie was such a big hit, right? It was very important in our culture. So that all said, there are movies that do this realism. Now, I know there was an astrophysicist named Kip Thorne who was the Interstellar's consultant. And I sat with Thorne years ago, and we talked about the time travel possibilities. Now, you think time travel, well, you know what? Modern science and astrophysics, those things don't kind of go together with time travel, because time travel is, time is a linear concept. You can never go back in certain instances. And Thorne produced an argument to Stephen Hawking, and Hawking wrote a rebuttal that was to rebut Thorne's premise that time travel was possible. And as he relayed this, he was trying to be very clear how it went. He wasn't trying to say he believed it was possible. But now we're talking about accuracy, right? And this is where Interstellar got some of its information from. So as in the Interstellar movie, as time travel was instituted in Thorne's mind, entering a black hole, for instance, you could see your ship coming out of the accompanying white hole, which is the opposite end, all right, before you actually went into the black hole. And he mathematically showed this as possible. So he said to Hawking, see, time travel is possible. They were engaging in a little bit of intellectual discussion and not trying to assert any kind of a proof. Well, Hawking wrote back to Thorne that, I'll read your thing, but here's why I don't think it's possible. And Thorne read Hawking's response, and Hawking read Thorne's assertion again. And they wrote each other back, and this is Thorne's, what he relayed. And Hawking said, oh yeah, I think you're right. It is possible. And Thorne said, no, you were right. It's not. So what does that show you? It shows you that even when it comes to scientific accuracy, the brightest minds on the planet, which arguably Kip Thorne and Stephen Hawking, no longer with us unfortunately, can't agree. So science is on its way. We're getting there. But in the movies, you know, producers are going to go for the buck. They're going to go for the glitz and glamour. And sometimes the accuracy doesn't get left at the door. In 2001 Space Odyssey, which I saw when I was like 8 or 9 years old, and said, why are monkeys throwing bones around? Okay. And what's that big black thing? Okay. I didn't get the symbolism at the time, obviously. But when it turned into spacecraft, I was hooked. Okay. And I'm watching, you know, the work of the guy that I would end up working with many years later on the screen. I was just hooked. So the accuracy will come, I think, when we have science to back it up. Right now, we don't have a whole lot of that when it comes to the UFO arena. And there you go. That's my thought on that.
Thank you, Marc D'Antonio. Yes, Jennifer Stein.
I just wanted to say that the movie Mars with Matt Damon, where he's left behind, I thought was excellent. I spoke to a lot of biologists, and he has to produce his own water by this heating process and separate water out, and he builds a little greenhouse for himself. I thought that was very accurate in terms of biology and space and science and what we now know.
Okay. Thank you, Jennifer. We have a question from the audience member.
Yes, my name is Alex. I'm a resident of Rochester, New Hampshire, and I thank you, panel, for being here, for taking the time, and I really appreciate this weekend festival. I had a question pertaining to synchronicities or coincidences, however you prefer to call them, regarding the experiencer phenomenon. I consider myself an experiencer. I don't know if I'm an abductee, but I've certainly witnessed a number of UFOs, and I may have seen some extraterrestrial beings, and I'm still working through that, the trauma of that and the memory of that. Anyhow, earlier this morning, during the conference, I decided to just take a walk to get some fresh air while it was sunny out. I just needed to stretch my legs a little bit. And I was walking down the street, and I heard some beautiful singing coming out of a church. And it was the First Baptist Church of Exeter, also known as the Red Brick Church. I'll keep this brief. I entered the church, sat down, participated in the end of the program. It was near the end of the service. And I later met the pastor. It turns out that the pastor knew Betty and Barney Hill, and that the pastor's husband, the pastor's father, if I recall correctly, had once sold a used car to Barney Hill. I'm like, well, that could be just a coincidence. I wasn't actually planning on going to that church. I was just walking through the neighborhood and wandered into the church because I heard some singing. Would you call that a synchronicity? Would you call it a coincidence? And if it's a synchronicity, is that common to experiencers? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone on the panel care to answer? Yeah, Peter Robbins.
I've been fascinated by coincidences, significant ones, since I was young. I think it was Einstein who, I'm paraphrasing, but said the universe may look chaotic, but if we really regard it carefully, it tends to organize itself. I see significant coincidences as a gentle tap on the shoulder, reminding us that things indeed are more connected than we sometimes feel. Sometimes to such a degree, it can be quite shattering and memorable in the extreme. I like to think there's some kind of random law of physics that governs it. And there's also the thing of pure dumb chance and happenstance. People win a $100 million lottery, and it's just a matter of numbers and randomness. Other times, I can only say, who knows?
Thank you, Peter. Anyone else on the panel care to comment on that? Thoughts? Kathy? Anybody? Okay, Jennifer Stein.
I have actually read some material about this and experienced it in my own life, that when I begin to pay attention to synchronistic events, it's almost as if they speed up, or I'm aware of more synchronistic events, that one almost begets the other. And if the world is truly a series of vibratory dimensions that we can connect with, relate with. I mean, we know physical nature is a matter of vibratory densities and things like this, just the physical world around us, the way atoms bind together and things. And we know, as I told you in my presentation, I've been studying about the electric universe. When you go and meet some of these physicists who are talking about the nature of the electrical universe, they will absolutely talk about the electrical nature of coincidence, that there's actual physics to it. And some of them are writing on this topic. So I would encourage people to explore the electric universe theorists if they're interested more in that topic.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Anyone else? Okay, let's get to a question now from Zoe in Manchester, UK. And we're going to direct this to Chuck Creteau at the moment because we were talking about this before and it's kind of right up his street. Do UFO sightings increase at certain times of the year with certain moon cycles? And do abduction reports increase at those times as well? Chuck Creteau.
Yeah, so we were looking at these questions a little earlier to kind of prep for him, and I found that one, and I think, Kathy, you and I were talking a little bit about this earlier. So I had always had a theory going on, and Paul, you and myself had both talked about the question of do sightings tend to happen more around the month September, October area? And the reason we were asking that question, I mean, we're here because of a very historical event that happened on September 3rd. And then Betty and Barney Hill, September 19th into the 20th. And my own father's experiences happened roughly around this time of the year. And I've taken a large number of reports this time of year in this area. And I was always curious, what does that have to do with anything? And is there any evidence to suggest that? So we started looking at the National UFO Reporting Database run by Peter Davenport. And obviously MUFON has some other statistics I'd love to take a look at sometimes, but you can actually break it down by each month across the U.S. and by the year, and you can go right up. And I started seeing a very clear pattern. That pattern was every time that a year had a higher incident of reports, it was always the same month. That month was June. It was always June. And then roughly in 2003, you see July being that month. And right around 2003, 2004, you start to notice that it goes down in August, and then it's always up in September and October, and then it goes completely down, and then it starts up. And from that point on, July is always the month that you have the most reports. So, Kathy, you and I were talking a little bit about, well, why is that? And I had my own theory, and you kind of confirmed that theory. Do you want to speak a little bit about that?
Well, we were talking about the states where the most reports are made. And I spoke about Florida and California, and we were talking about the good weather year-round in both of those places, and how more people are outside looking into the sky, regardless of the month. And so I thought that maybe that played into it. And we started talking about abduction reports. And we, on my team last year, in the fall of the year, were receiving maybe 50 to 75 reports per month. But after January of this year, it began to increase. And now we're receiving an average of about 150 reports every month, and wondering why is that happening. And I really cannot say for certain why it is. I don't know if it's the fact that I've been speaking a lot about MUFON's experiencer research team, or if there are actually more cases taking place of more people who are willing to make confidential reports. So it's a big question mark in my mind.
And to touch on that, you had also mentioned 2015 and on, there seemed to be less reports. In fact, July of 2014, in this month.
In this year.
In this year.
There were fewer reports than last year.
And that's pretty rare. I mean, if you look at the statistics and you look at the years, starting in 2014, according to the National UFO Reporting Database, the reports have gone down slightly every year. But 2014 seems to, in fact, July was the only month that there's ever been over 1,100 reports given to that site. So it's interesting to see that go down the last 4 years.
Well, thank you, Chuck and Kathy. Anyway, anyone else have a response to a question to the question from Zoe in England?
I have a question to follow up on that.
All right. Do you have a question, sir?
Yes, to follow up on that.
Yes, please speak close to the mic, if you would, please.
Okay. My name's Andy, and I was wondering whether there's any difference in the variations of density of reports in the southern hemisphere.
Okay, good question. Someone like to respond? Someone, please respond. Okay. Marc D'Antonio, how about you, sir?
I think what the deafening silence you hear is in response to the fact that we all live in the northern hemisphere, and we're probably not as aware as we should be about the southern hemisphere reports. So I'll be the one to say that we don't know. And sorry. Can't know everything. We try.
Thank you, Mark. Honest answer. This young lady had a question from the audience.
Hi, my name's Gail. Thank you for the
Real close to the mic, please. Thank you.
Okay. I have a trifecta. I'm going to do this real quick. My first question, kind of / observation, is to Jennifer. Great presentation. I noticed a couple of things on the stones. One was the supposed man bag. You had made a connection to the Sumerians. I was wondering if you had any discussion about that, and the H's. Also, I made a connection with the keystone to Pumapunku. I don't know if that's been discussed. And I believe that's it for that. The other question was to Paul Eno on the 9 unidentified species of parasites. And I believe I understood during your presentation you made the reference to small, lowercase gods, possibly Sumerian, the fish gods, etc., of that kind of pantheon, we'll call it, if you feel that they are parasitic. And then the other question is to Kathleen Marden. I have a very good acquaintance source who, this is back in the 70s, so we didn't have all this high-tech stuff going on, and she is an experiencer, has been an experiencer all her life. On a whim, called your Aunt Betty, and Betty picked up the phone and said, "Are you a journalist?" So she was very scared and nervous, a young adult, and said, "No, ma'am, I'm not." And she basically presented herself to her, and Betty said, "I'll tell you what," she lived down in the Merrimack Valley, Mass area, and she says, "Go along the river." So that would be the Merrimack River. And she gave her a site that I'm very aware of that runs in the valley, and sure as she did have contact. So I was wondering if you ever had that kind of conversation with your aunt about the river systems being a conduit for contact. Thank you.
I think we just filled up the rest of the show. Thank you. All right. So I'll turn it over to Jennifer Stein. Jennifer, if you could say 5 or 10 words about the background Göbekli Tepe. Sure. Just so for our people out in radio, I always wanted to say that. People out in radio land will be able to understand what it is in case they don't know.
So I don't think that she asked a specific question about the Sagba text, but I referred to them, and for the listening audience, there is a Sumerian cylinder text. It's in the University of Pennsylvania Museum in Philadelphia, and it discusses the ancient cattle and grain story out of Sumer. And Sumer is a culture that developed between the Tigris and the Euphrates River around 6,000 BC, maybe earlier, we're not sure. And this cattle and grain text discusses two beings, Lanar and Ashtar, who descend from this mysterious place referred to as the Duku. We don't know if the Duku is a high mountainous region or is some kind of craft or is from another planet or some other dimension. It's a mystery. And these two beings bring farming to humanity. They bring the intelligence of how to do advanced agriculture and the development of cereal grains into a food source, or refining natural wheats and grains that were maybe here on the planet, but turning them into developed agriculture. So that's called the Sagba text. And I'll turn the mic over to Kathleen, who can discuss the second part of the question.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Kathleen Marden.
With regard to the question on whether or not my Aunt Betty and I had discussed the prevalence of sightings of UFOs along rivers, I did have a discussion with Betty when I was in my late teens, probably 18 or 19 years old, and it was sightings that my girlfriends and I had of UFOs along the Merrimack River as we were out driving around at night. And so that is about the extent of my knowledge. I know that Betty did speak with many, many people who had UFO sightings in many different areas.
Thank you, Kathy. I guess there was another part of the question directed to me in reference to parasitical entities. This is a concept most people are not used to hearing about in paranormal studies. When you get beyond UFOs, people will think of ghosts, must be spirits of the dead. And, well, it's been a long time since I believed any of that. I think that the truth, at least as we see it, Ben and I see it, is very different. The parasitical entities we feel are perhaps undiscovered science. They seem to be life forms. I've been running into them for the better part of 50 years, and I couldn't really explain them beyond the theology of the demon, which there's such as it is, in poltergeist cases, exorcism cases, things of this kind, until I started thinking of it in a new way. And again, maybe I'm wrong, but the way I see it is that there were at least 9 different species of these, and I kind of rank them from the top, which is the wise. And believe me, they're not wise in any way that's going to benefit us. And are they demons or are they evil? Well, what do you mean by evil? I hate to be relativistic, but when it comes to something that's good for the mosquito that sucks your blood, it's good for them, but it's not necessarily good for us, particularly if there's a disease attached to it. So these are relative things. The wise tend to work alone. They will at times follow families for generations, and this stuff gets pretty weird. For example, I was in California lecturing in San Diego one time, and there was a woman in the audience who just drew my attention. You know, it wasn't anything to do with her good looks or anything. It was just there was something wrong going on there. And she came up to me later and said, I needed to talk to you. And sure enough, she had one of these following. It might have been one of the wise, it might have been one of the others, following her family for generations. They were all psychic, all the way down to her grandmother and great-grandmother. They all had these gifts, but you could feel something attached to her. You kind of know what these things feel like, and it's not good. So there's that, and then they kind of move down the food chain, so to speak, to the bottom of the line, which is the brats, as I call them. And they're two-dimensional thinkers. They will act like small children. And one of the most fascinating tendencies of all parasites, particularly the lower echelon that I've found, is that the longer they spend attached to a human host, or in our world, as it were, because I believe they're multiversal creatures. You know, they come and go. We've seen them working in 3 or 4 different worlds at the same time to feed. The longer they spend doing that away from their own worlds, the more they tend to forget their own origins, which I think is really fascinating. I was working with a very famous artist in New York City. I know that Peter Robbins knows who that is, but I don't want to say her name. For 25 years, she had one of these, I believe it was one of the brats, throwing her down the stairs and doing all this sort of thing. And the thing was afraid to leave her because it didn't know what to do or where to go or how to eat. And they need to eat. These are creatures. They're not spirits. They're entirely physical in their own worlds, according to my opinion. In the middle echelon, you have the farmers, who will literally farm you or your family, sometimes, again, for generations. They'll sometimes move from one member of the household to another. We see this day in and day out. And I don't want to take too much time with this, but that's essentially how it works. There'll be a long exposition of this in my next book that's coming out next year. And you can stay tuned to our website for that, behindtheparanormal.com. But that's essentially it. I want to stress that I am the last person, and so has Ben, to take away personal responsibility. I think we're responsible for our own problems. I think there's a tendency to say the devil made me do it, in order to blame, especially in the modern America, you want to blame someone else for your own problems. But I think it's there are these parasites which will push your buttons, feed on you. They learn. They're very intelligent, and how do you fight this? Well, Ben and I call it the Peter Pan theory. Think happy thoughts. Sounds dumb, but boy, does it ever work. We go into poltergeist cases, I got rid of the worst poltergeist I ever dealt with by using a joke book. Bring in positive energy, especially humor. I always told my boys growing up, always laugh but not at each other. Keep it positive. So essentially, positive energy will cut off the food supply of the negative energy, and you're at square one to defeat these things. So, okay, so we will, I don't know if anybody else has a comment on that. Now, Shane has been working with me for years now, almost 20 years on this parasite issue, and I will try not to trip poor Jennifer here. And Shane, if you'd like to comment on that.
Sure. So yeah, I'll be talking more about this a little bit later today, 2:45 to 4 o'clock, and I'll be getting really in depth to what initiates a connection between us and these parasites. You know, what draws them to us, and it's actually frequency based, emotional frequencies, and I'll be really elaborate with that. And once you understand actually what it initiates and allows it to continue, you understand how simple it is to get rid of. And the common techniques that are used by most people to get rid of them don't work. And there's a reason why they don't work, and I'll be discussing that thoroughly later on.
All right, thank you, Shane. We have a question from the audience? Yes. Just please step right up close to the mic there and state your question, if you would, please.
Hi, my name's Michelle. I was wanting to ask about orbs and what the different colors of the orbs mean. And what does it mean when an orb changes color?
Okay, was that for anyone in particular?
For anyone in particular.
Okay. Anyone want to talk about orbs? Because I think this is relevant to this conference, because orbs seen in the sky, people can call them UFOs. So Kathy Marden.
I've worked on several cases where orbs were involved inside people's homes and also in their yards. I spoke yesterday, I showed a photograph of an orb that was white and had a light blue halo around it. And this orb entered a man's bedroom, flew across the room, put out iridescent tentacles, and then drove into his body, and he was cured from cancer that night. So that was really a benevolent experience. I worked on an experience, and Paul is familiar with this because I asked him to become involved in it as well, of a pilot at an airport in the Southwest. And he was observing and taking photographs of red orbs. And also he was seeing gray orbs with goat faces inside them. And he was having highly negative experiences. He even referred to them as demonic, because in one case he was in his office, he had his shirt off, and he felt fingernails tear across his chest, and he had bleeding scratches on his chest. So both positive and negative.
Thank you, Kathy. Chuck Creteau.
Yeah, just real briefly. I can't answer the question. I don't know if anybody here really can. I mean, if we knew what different colored orbs meant, somebody would be writing the next book and probably going on another lecture tour, right? But what I can tell you is there are web pages designed just around orange or red orbs alone. You can find Facebook pages where people report just specifically those types of orbs. In Ossipee, New Hampshire, not too far from here, about 50 minutes north on 16, I read multiple reports, all in the same night, that were given to the police department in Ossipee, New Hampshire. All these people were on 16 going northbound, red orbs following their cars. They pulled over, called police, all in the same night. It's fascinating. My own family have a place on Ossipee Lake, which they witnessed, my brother, my niece, and my nephew, orbs coming down, crisscrossing over Ossipee Mountains and then going out the opposite direction they came in. And I know multiple people that see these orbs. Actually, it's one of the most common types of sightings that I have probably taken in the area. I don't know if that answers your question at all.
Thank you. I have another question.
Thank you, Chuck.
I was wanting to ask, has anybody know about shadow people? They look like people, but they're just like an outline of a shadow of a human being, but can you explain what they are?
Well, I'll just take that briefly. The term was invented by a good friend of ours, Heidi Hollis, relatively recently. And the whole idea of, I've had producers get very upset with me when I describe it this way, but when you have the membranes, or brains, as physicists call it, B-R-A-N-E-S, which supposedly can separate one parallel world from another, our opinion, maybe we're wrong, is you look across it, and it could be someone who looks just like you, but they're going to look spooky and weird because they're going to be glowing because of the plasma and the electromagnetic field that may be involved in this brain. So they could also, sometimes they're dark and shadowy. It could be as simple as what we call that simple. It could be as simple as that is you're simply looking across a membrane into a parallel reality, and there's the being, or there's your Uncle John who died 6 years ago, and he never died in that world. I mean, it really gets wild. So I think that the shadow people also, and on the other hand, we run into them in parasite cases all the time, particularly little ones. And Shane and I and Ben have been working since 2005 on the Torrington, Connecticut case, which we call the Litchfield Triangle. And people see these little short things running around in their houses that are just dark, shadowy, humanoid-shaped creatures. So we really don't know, but we suspect they may be parasitical, or they may be just neutral and seen across the world boundaries of parallel realities. Anybody else have some thoughts on that? Shane, you got your thought on the shadow people? Because you and I kind of work on that.
Yeah, so a lot of people associate shadow people with negative entities. I found that's not always the case. A lot of it has to do with what Paul was talking about, multiversal type of things and crossovers, or what we call bleedovers. But I've encountered the shadow people that were actually helpful sometimes, and a lot of times they are negative. And later on in my discussion, I'll actually be showing a photo of one that I took that was actually running up on me. So if you guys stick around, you'll be able to see that.
Okay, thank you, Shane. Any more comments on that subject? Okay. We have just a few minutes left in the show. I'd like to get maybe one more brief question in from Katie from California. That kind of rolls off the tongue. As for anyone on the panel, do you find that people who are abducted have increased psychic powers? Anyone like to deal with that? Okay, we'll start with Kathy Martin.
Denise Stoner and I asked that question in our 2012 study of 75 people. 50 were experiencers, and 88% said that they had increased psychic or intuitive ability that they believed was the result of their experiences. We also asked that question in a recent MUFON study of 516 experiencers. And again, there was definitely heightened psychic and intuitive abilities among experiencers, and particularly among abductees.
I have to agree with Kathy, and at the same time, there is a factor I can best describe by example. Several years ago, Jennifer Stein and myself, the great UFO writer and a real champion in the field, Robert Salas, and his lovely wife, Marilyn, spent some time in the center of crop circle country at the height of the season. It was a very, very special experience for all of us. Jennifer had arranged the trip. We had one of the local authorities on the ground bring us to 3 sites on the first day. And Wiltshire is so beautiful I expected Jane Austen to ride up in a carriage at a certain point. It was overwhelming. And when you're on the ground with crop circles, you don't have the drama of looking down on them. My point being that people have asked me after the fact, did you feel something when you were in the circle? And I said, absolutely. I have no idea, though, whether or not it was the phenomenology or a physiology of the enhanced harmonic signature or any other number of factors that I was experiencing, or just the jaw-dropping 15-watt bulb reality of, oh my God, I'm in a crop circle. If you have had an abduction experience, and you have the psychic abilities sitting there, the same way that, gee, I'd like to draw and paint, but I've never really tried it, but now I think I'm going to. I'm not sure how that sort of figure-ground relationship works, but I do know the stats that Kathy is talking about are correct.
Okay, thank you, Peter Robbins. We have 2 minutes left, and first of all, I want to thank our wonderful speakers. Stay there, okay? Thank our wonderful speakers for this tremendous exchange today. Thank those who wrote in, and thank those from the audience. Okay. We are forgoing our announcements today except for one.
October 5th and 6th in Leominster, Massachusetts, the Greater New England UFO Conference. We'll be having Paul Eno, Marc D'Antonio, Shane Sirois, sorry about that, and many, many other exciting speakers at Leominster City Hall, www.newenglandufo.com. I have buttons I'm giving out to people. If you're interested, we hope to see you there.
Okay, very good. So please see all the website links on our site, behindtheparanormal.com, which is obviously our show site. You'll be able to get, if you wish. There are free 800 hours or more of shows from our past 11 years on the air, including our 4.5-year run on CBS Radio, and they're all free again, behindtheparanormal.com. You've also some very interesting links to the sites of our speakers, etc. So we will, next week, we're going to have, what are we going to have next week? We're going to have an open line show with Shane Sirois. That's right. So that's going to be from our studios in Rhode Island, and all paranormal subjects are open game. And we leave you this afternoon with a beautiful thought from the 14th century Persian poet Hafiz. I love this guy. I wish I could show you, when you are lonely or in darkness, the astonishing light of your own being. Okay, we still have another minute, all right? I want to also thank our impromptu producer today, Ben Eno, who's usually my co-host on the show. He's been invisible, but this couldn't have happened without him, and I never worry when he's in charge. He loses a little more weight, but there we go. They agree. So, but in any case, tune in. That's Ben in the back room, right. So again, thank everyone. Great audience today. And do tune into our show. It's every week, 12 to 1 Eastern Time on WOON, AM and FM radio. You probably can't get it in this area because it's too far away, but onworldwide.com is the site. Just hit the ON, the ON at work icon, and you'll be able to not only hear the show, but have the jarring experience of actually seeing us there in the studio. And we usually have a good time. We have a really great, intelligent guests such as these folks. So we're done. I'm Paul Eno. There's Ben Eno back there. Thank you so much.